I'm delighted to welcome Lance Faulkner. Lance and I met actually in Oxford in last year when the UK ASFP, Association of Solution Focused Practitioners, put on their conference. And I went along to Lance's presentation and I was really struck by the elegant way that he had helped change the culture of Heidelberg International School through the use of solution focus. And I said to him afterwards, we must get you up for a global chapter. And so I'm delighted. It does take a while sometimes, but I'm delighted that we've got him along today. And Lance, I'm going to hand over to you now and welcome. Enjoy.
Yes, thank you, John, and thank you for inviting me to this talk. It's wonderful to be able to connect with all of you from various parts of the globe. And I am coming from Heidelberg, Germany, and I am a whole school counselor at a Heidelberg International School. As I was thinking about today's talk and this idea of being able to influence a corporate or a company culture, an organizational culture, whatever culture you come from, I was reflecting on the genesis of this in my own setting. The Associate Dean of Carnegie Mellon, her name is Anina Wooley. She wrote in a podcast that I listened to just recently that when we're facing problems, organizational teams learn to like each other. And it's because they perform well that they like each other. It's not the other way around. In other words, it's not people who perform well like each other. Rather, it's being able to learn to appreciate what we all bring to the workplace. And we learn to like each other simply by performing better. And reflecting on that, as well as my own experience, I will tell you that in my initial year of counseling at my school, and I started there 10 years ago, and it was 2013 going on 14. That initial year, I found that I had spent a great deal of time with teachers who were exasperated and needing guidance to support students in the classroom. So today, we'd like to be able to bring you into this conversation. I'm going to be coming from my point of view, that is a small international school of about 300 students in Heidelberg, Germany. But I would like to be able to connect this to your setting and your organization. Finding a capacity for change is something that I think I was inspired in at the close to the beginning of my career. And the story starts with Troy. Troy was a 15-year-old boy that I met in an educational meeting around his future. Troy had a lot of behavior plans. He had a lot of some learning disabilities that were documented. His test scores were not what anyone would say would be capable of graduating from a high school. And this was in New Hampshire at the time, in the US. He had lots of incident reports. And I walked into a meeting with my colleague who ran a nonprofit that I was helping to run, working with the school system on ways to help the school system find solutions for boys like Troy. And I walked into this large room and it was filled with psychologists and teachers, administrators. There were a few assistant teachers that also attended the meeting. And in front of the head administrator was a large stack of files, so large that I couldn't see his computer. It was that thick. And it was basically Troy's file from the time that he was in primary school all the way until he was 15. He'd been kicked out of school, suspended for the second time that year. And Troy was sitting in the corner with his mother. Troy had a leather jacket on and was staring out the window. And I sat there with my colleague John for a good 35 minutes and listened to administrators speak about what was happening that year, what led to his current suspension. And during, as they were speaking, I was looking at Troy. And Troy was continuing to look out the window. And every now and then he would have his smile on his face. And looking out the window, I could see his hand kind of wave out the window. And then he'd start messing with his jacket while listening to everyone talk about how much of a problem child he was. At one point of the conversation, my colleague John slipped me a small piece of paper, and on it he wrote, "Ask him this question." You see, all of these administrators over that course of 35 minutes were often talking about how they didn't trust him anymore. They didn't trust Troy. The teachers didn't trust Troy. And the question on that piece of paper was, ask him who he trusts. So it finally came down to John and I to be able to speak at the meeting. And I looked directly at Troy and I asked him that question. I said, "Troy, you don't know me. You don't know my friend John here, but you know these other people in the room. And I'm curious, who do you trust?" Well, Troy looked at his mom and then he looked out the window. And his mom started to um, give an answer when I asked the question again. "Troy, who do you trust?" And he's like, "Well, he's not here." And I was like, "Well, who is that?" And he's like, "I trust him." And he pointed out the window. And I was like, "Oh, who's out there?" And he's like, "That's my neighbor, Jim. Um, Jim brought us here today because our car it broke down, and he gave us a lift, and he's waiting outside while this meeting is taking place." And my colleague John then asked the question, "Why isn't Jim here?" So in the next few minutes, we asked Mom to text Jim to come into the meeting. Now, at that time, Mom started to talk about Jim as the neighbor. Troy had explained that Jim had spent evenings with him, teaching him how to weld, and that he had made some sculptures in the backyard. And he even said that, Jim lets me make mistakes, and sometimes I do make mistakes, but he's telling me I'm getting better. And I like spending time with Jim. Well, it came time for Jim to come into the meeting, and these administrators in the meeting were not very pleased. One, they were looking at their watches and wondering what this was all about. And I assured them that this was well worth our time. And we invited Jim into the meeting, and it's like, "Jim, you don't know me. Your neighbor Troy just met me." And I asked him who he trusts, and he said you. He also has told us that you've been teaching him how to weld and how to make these metal sculptures. I'm wondering if you could share with us what it is that you do to teach Troy, what works. And over the course of the rest of the meeting, the neighbor Jim, who was not invited to the meeting, who was sitting out in his car, began to teach all of those teachers and administrators how to teach Troy. Now, that story sticks with me over all of these years because one, it was one of the first times in a meeting that I asked a solution-focused question. I was just beginning as a counselor in a not-for-profit organization, trying to help and reach these kids. And Troy's capacity to learn was completely forgotten by those administrators. And that's what's driving this talk today. What makes a difference for all of those people that we work with, those people we serve, as well as those people that comprise our companies and our organizations. I'm again a whole school counselor. I've been in Heidelberg, Germany now for about 11 years. And in my first year, I tried my best to learn German, and then I was fortunate enough to join the faculty at the school. And it is a small educational community. There's around 150,000 people in Heidelberg. Wonderful, bucolic place. And here are some pictures of my setting. I'm lucky to be here. So a lot of our inspiration comes today from a number of solution-focused practitioners, mainly Ben Furman, who is based out of Helsinki. And the Helsinki Institute has really been at the forefront of this approach in terms of skill building, which is what I've been able to bring into my school setting. If you have not come across Ben Furman before, I urge you to do so. He is always an inspiration, and has been really an inspiration to me over these years. Also, Denise Youssef, who I had the pleasure of meeting when I worked with the practitioners at Brief in London. If you have not seen her book, The Solution Focused Approach with Children and Young People, and you work with young people, it is a wonderful gathering of solution focused practitioners who have contributed to that piece of writing. And so Denise's work is definitely inspiring our talk today. And Linda Metcalf, many of us know of Linda's work in the US in solution-focused schools, and the kid skills approach, which you're going to learn about, very much comes from her mindset training and being able to work with staff to change the conversation in meetings, and especially working with parents. And last but not least, the guys in London is what I call them, but these were my mentors over the course of years that I've been here in Europe. And Evan and Chris and Harvey and the Center for Solution Focused Practice in London remains an inspiration to me daily as I implement this work. So today, we'd like to kind of draw what I call a pathway to useful meetings. And this will allow you to take action in your setting. How do we promote better conversations that overcome problems and engage needs in our company culture? And where can we see what works for us with those we serve and those that carry out the work, where we're creating a greater connection? We're also going to be able to see the power of mirroring our clients. And for many of us who are solution-focused practitioners, we know what this is about, being able to see our support staff, those in key roles, and being able to bring some purpose to the meetings that we have that involve these people, being able to help them see their capacities for change, and then instill that in the people we serve. Then there's also this mindset of skill building, which in many ways allows us to conduct meetings and share these skills without ever speaking about a problem behavior. And I'm going to break that down for you and show you how it can work. And then providing training within an organization. So for many of you coaches out there, here's an opportunity to provide training within an organization and targeting key roles and giving them the inspiration to be able to approach meetings in this way, allowing skill building to be the forefront, the capacity to change, to be the forefront of the conversation, rather than spending so much time speaking about the problem behaviors. And then last but not least, skill building from Ben Furman's approach celebrates a client's success and being able to bring that into future meetings and create a culture that celebrates success along the way. So we have a couple case studies that I'd like to introduce to you, and then maybe you can just kind of keep these children in your mind as we're discussing. And you might even be able to picture some people that you work with who are not this age. However, some of these things remind you of the way that they approach their work, or perhaps you've interacted with a parent or a coworker, and they have these tendencies. So I was working with a teacher who came to me, and she was very concerned about a 10-year-old student in her class, and the parents were both busy executives. And the teacher observed a few things after I asked her some questions. She talked about the 10-year-old spacing out in class, daydreaming. He really couldn't stay on any sort of unit task during the day, um, not for a very long time. He was very distracted. And she had noticed that he would go out to his locker between every class. And at one point, she decided to follow him. And when he opened his locker, she discovered many, many energy drink, these sorts of high caffeine energy drinks in his locker, lots of empties and a whole pack of them at the bottom. And she began to speak with him about how much he'd been drinking these drinks, how long, and she was convinced that this was negatively affecting his mood and his academic performance. He had fallen off, not really paying attention and not doing very well on assessments. He also didn't come to school as much. He would often come late, and his overall engagement was low. I asked her, has there been some moments, some shining moments over the last year that you've known this child that you could speak to his capacities in terms of the things that he likes and enjoys? And she mentioned that he loved scientific research and presenting to the class. So that's our first case study, something to keep in mind. Our second case study is a 6-year-old girl. The 6-year-old is struggling to communicate with her class, not really making friends, really trouble making friends, especially on the playground, seemed to be getting in arguments and disagreements every day. She would lash out and shout and hit her classmates sometimes. And this meant that the teachers had really only one way to diffuse the situation, and that was to remove her and bring her out to the hallway and say, you can come back to the classroom when you've settled down. They obviously wanted a different approach. The exceptional moment when I asked the question of the teacher was that the child was really, really relaxed when they were able to explore books and pictures and information about outer space. So her interests were definitely studying the solar system, and that definitely came into play when we come back to this case study later. But just keep these sorts of behaviors in your mind in terms of those that are angry, frustrated, perhaps not being able to communicate very well in your setting. And as a result, the only way that you are able to deal with the situation is to diffuse it in some way, that is, control it. And we're going to talk a little bit about the theory behind that behavioral approach and the shortcomings of it, and how we can build on top of that with a solution-focused approach. So in my organization, it was really all about partnering with the teachers. And in your organization, when it comes to meetings in your setting, I wanted to really discover today how you would imagine having to call in, or who would you imagine calling in a situation where there was a particular behavior that was affecting someone's performance, and knowing that the problem is right there. And what are the key considerations that come into play if you only have a problem-focused meeting with that person? Obviously, that person is going to struggle to connect with you if you lead off with the problem. So to chime in. What are some key considerations if you start that meeting off with a problem? What what do you think would be the outcome? Well, I think for most of us, we know that a problem-centered meeting at the very beginning doesn't really go in the right direction. People become defensive. They often become standoffish. They might even make excuses or point the finger and blame somebody else. We get a lot of negative responses. So for many of our colleagues and people that we are trying to inspire in our organizations, they're definitely not as well versed in Steve DeShazer and the like in terms of being able to see how powerful problem talk can be in terms of determining where a conversation goes. And all of us have key staff that are coming to us and needing guidance. Even if we're one-on-one coaches, we find ourselves in settings where we need to exercise a different approach. And being able to look at those staff and ask them for the exceptions to the problems, which is what happened in both of our case studies. Being able to walk away with what it is that these children in these cases have as an interest, have as something that drives them, their passions, and not just seeing the behavior as something that defines them. There's a sociologist from Germany that is named Harmet Rosa, and he talks of Maslow's hierarchy in terms of a painter. And the picture that will come up on this slide is Pablo Picasso in his studio. Harmet Rosa speaks of Maslow's hierarchy in terms of trying to just paint what a painter really is. Now, if you have the means to paint in terms of making money, right? You can gain the studio that is just right for you. You can find the best light. You can acquire the finest paints and brushes. And you can also compare your work with others. You can even dress like an artist, right? But what he says is that if we only focus on the intervention that dictates the means to control behavior or intervene or contain it, then the means becomes the goal. So instead of all of these things that make us look like a painter, we need to find a way to paint and make work and make beautiful work, work that is meaningful to us and meaningful to the masses. And that sort of difference is made when we can connect with teachers on their capacities to ask these solution-focused questions of the children that they work with, of the parents that they partner with. And by doing so, we're doing what we were talking about from Anina Wooley at the beginning, which is we are empowering them to do better work. And as a result, they like the people that they're working with. They're drawn to it. They're energized by it. And it's no longer about the problem. It's about being able to perform better because the skills we learn make us better. So I really like this analogy of being able to say that, we can do all the right things and put on the right clothes and have this fancy studio and everything that would make us seem like an artist and not actually paint. And our needs are really connected to the beautiful artwork that we can produce. Skills in any setting, when becoming the focus, have more potential in creating a beautiful work of art than if we are to approach just the problem itself. So the missing step is taking a minute to consider the capacities that exist or could exist that would address what is not working. And if it's not working, as Steve says, do something differently. So the conversation around key roles, In my setting, I considered this model in terms of the child being the center. And this comes from the Tao. And the Tao illustrates for all of us that the wheel, if we were to see this diagram as a wheel, is that there are several spokes to the wheel, several parts of the wheel, and we join all those spokes together. But it's the center that makes the wagon move. And in my setting, the center is the child. And for all of those roles outside of the center, these key roles in a child's life, we have our guardians, our parents, we have teachers, administrative staff, we have myself as a counselor. We also have friends and family. And all of these key roles encompass what makes a difference for a child. But it's the child itself that makes that wagon wheel move. And for your organization, I would ask you, who is it in the center of that wheel for you? Who are you focusing on that you feel needs to move, has that capacity to change, but your role is to be able to influence in some way a way to do that. So over this next slide, I'd like you to just imagine who that person is and keep that person in your mind as being the center of the wheel. Minahan and Rappaport out of Harvard, they use this wonderful behavioral intervention model called, they call it FAIR. And you can imagine in a classroom, and this is very much traditional education, classroom management, when there are behaviors in a classroom of 23 or more children, these behavioral interventions are focused on a few things. One, we have a hypothesis of why the behavior is actually happening. So we try to get to the root of the problem right away. Teachers do this all the time. Managers do this all the time in terms of their team performance. And then we start making accommodations. That is, we start to move things around to try to make it so that the behavior is less. I've had teachers describe this as walking on pins and needles. That is, they're doing whatever they can to prevent the behavior, that they're very much changing the flow of the day. They're changing how they approach the class, how they speak to the child. And that goes into these interactive strategies, which is the next part of the behavioral intervention. They'll have things that they will say to the child to try to get them to motivate them in some way. And they come up with these strategies and they're employing these on a daily basis, and it's exhausting them. They're engaging the problem head on and doing the best that they can with what they have. And they also learn how to respond, when not to respond, when to let things go. And as a result, it's creating a little chaos in their setting. Now, you can imagine if this was a part of a greater team, maybe even middle management working with a team that's producing, and this is happening where they're having to manage people differently and having to accommodate them based on their needs. It can create a lot of reactive problems, a lot of conflict. Skill development builds off of this by being much more proactive. That is, for every problem, there is a skill that we can match that will help us overcome that problem. And as a result, Ben Furman speaks to the direct benefits that can bring to the self and to others. We can have built-in reminders from our people of authority. It could be teachers, it could be managers, built-in reminders of how they can use that skill. And it's something that they've actually supported. That is, if I'm not doing what I need to do, and we've been able to build this skill over the last few weeks, I give you permission to remind me that I need to employ that skill. It's giving people agency. It's allowing them to be the center of the wheel so that we can all move together. This also supports self-regulation. I see this in my setting a lot, where many of the skills that we build in our children have to do with emotional regulation. That is, like our case study, our 6-year-old who is lashing out at her friends, being able to control those emotions and being able to make friends without those emotions getting in the way. And then celebrating success. Skill building allows us to celebrate the success that we gain from simply the results and the outcomes of being able to employ this skill. And as a result, as the skill is happening more often, as Steve DeShazer would say, those things are happening more often, that means the problem is less. There's just not enough time for the problem to occur. And if it does occur, we can simply go back to reminding them and allowing them to know that they've had some success. How did they do that? What did they notice when they were doing that? What made a difference for them when they were able to employ the skill? And then enable further growth. And this is the most exciting part in our settings, is once someone has not only learned a skill and gained the benefits of the skill, they can then teach someone else. So one of the most wonderful things that happen within my school is when I can have a child go to a classmate and teach them how to use their skill. They become the hub, the center of the wheel that's moving this capacity for change. And this also can happen within faculty and teachers. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that influence, because the more our faculty at the school were able to interact with this method, with the children and with the parents, I found that they were also bringing these questions into meetings and asking these questions in terms of, what is it that we have the capacity to change in terms of our skills to face this problem that we're complaining about, and making that be the forefront of the meeting. So how do we do this? In my setting, we had a few things that, and what I tried to do is just go back in time and try to recreate how this played out in my school. And I think I'll remind you of what happened this past July in Oxford. There was a psychologist that attended my talk, and he's from Finland as well, knows Ben Furman, and he came up to me after my talk and he said to me, there's something that strikes me about this approach when you bring it into an organization and what you were able to do at your school. And he said it's a bit subversive, and that is, you were able to influence in a positive way this idea of skill building within the school, but you did it from a position of stories coming from those that were actually doing the work. It didn't come from the administration. It didn't come from the leadership. That came later. But first, we recorded stories of success. So anytime that I met with a teacher, I met with them initially to come up with the skill, and then they employed it with the child. And then we met again and we recorded. I had them send me an email. I had them in some way give kind of a record of that intervention. And then they would partner with each other. So I would encourage those teachers to share with another teacher what they were doing, giving them a chance to teach another teacher how they were able to develop this skill in a child, the difference it made. These other teachers noticed as well, because these children were beginning these behaviors that they were witnessing out on the playground and in the hallway were beginning to change. So they would speak in the staff room about this success. That all happened first. And this is the kind of the quiet subversion. And that is, then we meet with administration and have these teachers share that success. They speak to the benefits of solution focus with their administration. So attend that staff meeting, ask for permission to speak and share these good stories how they were able to focus on a skill rather than the problem behavior. And as a result, our administration saw that this was making such a difference that they had asked for me to develop a training for our classroom assistants. So all of our primary classrooms have assistants in the classroom, and they're what I call first responders. They're the ones that are actually working with the child with the behavior while the teacher is with the class. And I provided an in-house professional development and introduced kid skills and taught them how to do this with the kids. And it came after the administration saw that it was making a difference. And then we were able to bring it in as a professional development within the school. After that initial professional development, we then had a follow-up professional development on how to also partner in meetings. So the approach that's really powerful with kids skills is that you introduce the skill within the classroom with the child, and then you call in the parents. And when you call in the parents, the child shows his or her parents the skill that they've learned. It changes the whole conversation. And then these teachers, this faculty were able to look at the parents and say, would you partner with us and be able to work on this skill with your child at home? And as a result, we have a different relationship with parents. We're not having meetings around a problem. We're not having defensiveness as a result of speaking about these problems, but we're introducing a skill at the very beginning, and we're using the successes that a child can share from their own success to their parents because they're proud. They're celebrating that success in the classroom. And then lastly, we follow up with some reflections in staff meetings where every week we're able to share the skill that's being worked on in grade 2 and grade 4, grade 5, and an update on how people are doing. Again, that becomes the crux of our work. And it's less about the behavior and more about the solution. I've seen that this empowers teachers. It's brought more connection between them because they all feel that they understand how to use this sort of methodology. We have happier children because they're confident and proud. They brag about their skill. They teach it to their friends. And we have fewer disciplinary demands as a result. We're not having to call kids out for a problem behavior, especially if they've gone through building some of these skills and some confidence. So how does this apply to your setting in terms of this approach? So I've pictured this same approach in your setting and being able to record stories about the skills that you've been able to build within a team, with a colleague, with somebody that you're training, and then partner with that colleague to share the success with the overall organization in some way. And have that same approach that we did in a school setting, have that work within these teams, have them start to talk about the success together, the skills that they're building together, and then meet with the head management and speak to them of the solution-focused benefits that come from introducing a key skill that you identified that was going to help this individual overcome a problem that they're facing at work. They start performing better. The management sees it, and then the management supports an in-house training that will bring many of you who are coaches to come in and start matching skills that need to be built, capacity for growth within an organization with the problems that they are currently facing, and allow the potential for growth to be the conversation rather than the problem in itself. And then you immediately follow up after a in-house training by integrating that approach in meetings and begin to structure the meetings. And I will tell you, I felt that the culture of my school started to change when these teachers, without any prompting, were starting to ask solution-focused questions in meetings that were going off the rails. Can anyone here tell us if so and so, if there's if they connect to your class in a different way than what has just been described? Is there a bright spot out there? Anybody? Anybody? And most of the time there is. There's a class where that teacher has connected with the student, and then that teacher immediately can answer the question, how do you do that? How do you connect with that child when no one else has been able to? What makes this child tick? It's Troy. It's Troy in the room. It's Jim the neighbor. It's somebody who cares, somebody who sees that child for who they are, and most likely sees their capacity to learn. So this is how we can bring it into a company culture. I can see this being, and I used to work in marketing prior to going into education. I've seen organizations over the years, and I do wish that this methodology was much clearer to me back then. But I do see this being inspiring for organizations who are able to adopt this to their approach to meetings. So what are the benefits if we bring this approach to meetings, much like the school? Instead of empowering teachers, we have empowered managers. Managers who have a go-to. They have a tool that you can give them and actually urge them to look beyond the problem itself and being able to seek out what is it that I can build in terms of this person's strengths, this employee's aptitudes, all those things that they can bring to the table. We're empowering them to make a change. They're also making more connection with their employees rather than putting out fires, that's often what we'll say in school speak. Rather than putting out fires, they're really spending quality time with the people who are doing the work. And as we said at the beginning, they're beginning to like each other. That is, they are beginning to see that their performance is improving, and as a result, they like to work with each other. They feel successful together, and they're happier as a result. And we know that a happier staff that serves people, especially in social service organizations, a happier staff makes happier clients. If we're able to have a staff that sees the capacities of those that they serve, then we're going to be able to experience and make a reality those capacities in those clients. And last but not least, a potential for growth. If a company's performing well and they're meeting their outcomes and they're working well together and they like each other, that's a much better landscape in terms of growth than if we're spending most of our time complaining with each other and in undermining each other and doing all these things that are in a dysfunctional work setting. So I mentioned before that I treated the classroom assistants as first responders. Now, there are people within our organizations that we can put in this role. They are the ones that go and they put out the fires. They deal with the behaviors. And in my organization, the way that we were able to do that were with these in-house trainings. So I developed these courses that were based on kid skills, based on Ben Furman's work, and I introduced it to them in modules so that they were able to kind of digest it and ask questions and interact with it in that way. So we also were able to, out of these trainings, determine what were useful skills to train. So by having the teachers there with the conversation, they were able to match up a skill that might help a young child overcome a behavior. And this is not easy thinking. This can take a long time for some to get out of that mindset of just seeing the behavior staring them in the face, but rather being able to see that child's capacities to learn and take a chance. to introduce a skill to the child for changing that behavior. So this was the approach that we had. Some of the just modules that you can create to help educate those first responders in a solution-focused approach. You can bring some solution-focused teaching from your own practice, but you also can integrate this idea of being able to name a skill to overcome a problem. Ben Furman's got a wonderful way of presenting this, and that is, instead of saying it as a skill, just asking the child, if there's one thing that you could change for the better that would make your day at school better, what would it be? What would that one thing be? And see if they're able to say it. And if they're not able to say it, you can guess what it might be for them, because you see them struggling. You see that there's something that they want to be happier. And by connecting with them in that way and seeing that you see what will help them come to that place of happiness, allows the conversation to go to building that skill. So this idea was about caring for the caregivers, and this really came into practice during the pandemic, where I was doing a lot of remote work, and I was finding that not only were parents exasperated, but our teachers were very much needing support. So caring for the caregivers was a way of being able to help those in key roles, those that are helping to support these children, in my case, and create an environment of trust. And we were able to do that through first acknowledging the difficulties and letting them know that we know it's not been easy, and then inspiring them and supporting them with what works. And that's where skill building has really come into play. So anytime that we were meeting with teachers or meeting with parents, we were talking about developing partnerships where we can help learn about child development, learn about what to expect from their child at different stages. During the pandemic, it was really about routines and being able to create something that works. And all of this was in many ways caring for our staff, caring for those that were really overworked, maybe putting in way too many hours, and giving them a chance to take care of themselves and naming some of those things that they can do to be energetic and ready for the next day. So that's kind of the approach that you can often bring into an organizational culture, where you start to speak to where we're vulnerable. That is, if we are overworked and tired, obviously our performance is going to go down. So what are some ways that we can take care of each other, keep each other accountable to keeping work during our work hours, and being able to also take care of ourselves so that we are ready for the next day. So I did this through a series of workshops, and those were just some examples of workshops that we could reach out to the parents and educate them. So as we were partnering with the parents, with these individual meetings with teachers, parents could also gather together. And I just had one of those workshops this morning. We talked about ways to bring peace to 2024 and New Year's resolutions, but giving the parents a chance to gather together and learn from each other, encourage each other, realize that they're not alone. And that goes to the recognizing the difficulty and then seeing what's possible, because we all are in this together. So let me just take you just through a few points of Ben Furman's kid skills, if you're not familiar with this approach. And Ben Furman's website, if you type in kid skills, you'll find his website out of Helsinki. And there's also a free app that you can download on your phone that's quite helpful. But let's look through that together. What are some things that kid skills bring? One is that the app is laid out into a series of tabs, and the problem tab at the very beginning, the very top, is just a treasure trove of being able to match different skills with problems that are seen in the classroom or at home. And this was really designed for parents. So if you're working with children, with young people, this is a valuable tool. Each of those problems that are listed in the tab, and there's many, many listed, you should be able to find something that's pretty close to the behavior you see. And going back to that behavioral intervention and the work of Marshall Rosenberg in nonviolent communication, he said years ago that for every behavior, there is an underdeveloped skill or an unmet need. And if we can see it in that light, that is, no matter what behavior we see, especially these negative behaviors that we think are almost impossible to change, if we can recognize the need in that child, or it could be recognizing the need with that colleague, and we're able to address that in some way by building them up, by building up a skill that helps them overcome and meet that need, then we have addressed the behavior in a solution-focused way. So this app is, I think, very valuable. And the Kid Skills poster we also use in the classrooms to help guide the conversation so that the teachers don't have to memorize these questions. They can walk the child through the poster. These are things that you can see on his website. I know it's a little too small to read here, but the poster has them name the skill. They name, even for the younger children, they name a superhero, a role model, someone that they like to support them in the skill. They name all their supporters in the organization. And these children go with their posters, and they go to their music teacher, to their gym teacher, to the principal. They come to me and they ask if I could support them to learn their skill. And this app promotes a lot of growth in the children, because not only do they name their supporters, but they also can talk to reminders, give permission to all of us of the things that we can say or do, or maybe it's a kind of a secret sign of how to remind them to use their skill. And it's something that they can respond to. We create posters in the classrooms next to their cubby, where we can actually keep track of moments of success and list those off, and even relay those to the parents as they're happening. And this is a way to celebrate the success along the way. And then when they master the skill, they come up with a celebration that they have agreed with their parents that they'll go to that special ice cream place once they've gone through an entire week without a reminder. And they grow in confidence because they're focusing on their capacity to change. And again, that problem behavior becomes less and less. So out of this, there's many positive outcomes that can come from being able to bring this into your organization. And I know that our time is limited, but that was just an example of how it worked in my organization. But you're probably wondering, where are our case studies at the moment? And let's start with our 10-year-old child. That teacher did something that I did not expect. I challenged her and I said, this child loves research. Can you think of a way that you can get this child's attention? That very afternoon, she sat down with him and said, can you research something for the next science project? And she's like, I know you love to research, and I'd like you to look up everything that you can about the effects of caffeine on the adolescent brain. And on Monday, if you have some things that you found, I want to give you a chance to present it to the class. And this boy went home, and he obviously did some work over the weekend. We got an email from mom on Monday saying he's been allowed to use the computer a little bit more than usual because he he found some really nice things to put in his presentation. And he stood in front of his class and he presented a PowerPoint on the effects of energy drinks on the adolescent brain. But it didn't stop there. This teacher asked if he could, in the next lab report, be able to start to gather data on his own, the effects of caffeine on him. And by doing so, he was able to measure all of these different things from his mood. So he had to record his mood every morning. He recorded his sleep in terms of how well he slept and how many hours he slept. And he also recorded how much caffeine he was drinking and how much alternatives he was drinking. And this happened over the course of the next 3-4 weeks. And then he came up with a lab report. And the teacher came back to me very excited because what she discovered was that as the lab report continued, he started to see improvement in his sleep. He was drinking less energy drinks and drinking more water. His mood was improving. And he was able to present this in that final lab report. Now, what's striking to me is that she never mentioned to the child that that report was all about drinking less energy drinks, that those are dangerous for you, and all the warnings that a teacher would, without this approach, would give. Instead, she empowered him to do what came natural to him, and that is his love of science and his love of research, and let that be the skill that he's able to use to overcome the problem. For our 6-year-old girl, when we asked, is there one thing that would make your day better? Her answer was, I would like to make more friends, and I would like to be able to calm down. And her skill was something that, because she loved the solar system, she called her Mercury skill. And we made a place, a kind of a meditation corner in the classroom, so she didn't have to go out into the hallway. And when she was reminded to use her skills, she would go over to that meditation corner. And the teacher had checked out different books about the solar system from the library and kept them in the meditation corner. And she also printed off some pictures and put them around the corner as well. And this child, anytime was feeling a little angry, frustrated, she would go over and practice her breathing and get out a book and use her Mercury skill. Now, I become a bit emotional about this story because the teacher came back to me, and when she presented this skill to the parents, she called the parents in after a few weeks, and the child took her mom by the hand and walked her over to the meditation corner and explained to mom all the things that she's doing to try to calm down when she's angry. And she showed her the books, and she talked about her Mercury skill. And this all came from a 6-year-old girl. And the teacher was visibly emotional about this, that I've never been able to see a child not only overcome a problem like calming down and making friends in such a powerful way, where I can include the parents and partner with them and celebrate that success with them. She was about to call them in and talk about the latest lashing out when she came to my office. So by employing the skill, rather than calling the parents in right away, we give that child a chance to be the center of the wheel, and that capacity to change, to move that wagon with their own resources, with their own abilities. And that is really the power of the kid skills approach. And where's Troy? Well, after Jim came to that meeting, the conversation went a completely different direction. Jim started talking about how he knew some people who welded in the area, and that Troy had described to him that he wanted to be an underwater welder. Now, my response was, that sounds really dangerous. We got fire and water together. And that's when Troy shared with that group, that meeting, that that's why I want to do it. I've read that underwater welders don't make it to their 30th birthday, and I really don't want to live that long. And it was at that point that we realized that Troy was suffering with some depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. We were able to get him help, and he was in a clinic for a while, and then he returned back to doing his program in school. With the help of Jim and some of his contacts, we were able to get him certified in welding. He also took diving courses so that he could be able to learn how to underwater weld. And when I left New Hampshire, he was working for the state welding bridges. And I'm happy to say that he's now 32 years old and a father and has one child. So Troy made it to his 30th birthday. So it's stories like these that make me passionate for the power of skill building in any sort of setting. Obviously, my setting is speaking to the power of being able to teach children. But when it comes to our colleagues, if we can empower them to perform better and change the conversation in meetings with simply introducing a skill and giving your organization a chance to employ those skills, the outcomes are, the sky's the limit.